Welcome to Stories of Impact. In every episode, we travel the world to explore intersections of science and spirituality. I'm your host, writer Tavia Gilbert, and along with journalist Richard Sergey, every first and third Tuesday of the month, we look through a new lens at old traditions, hear from new generations as they dream up innovative solutions, and learn new ways to make sense of modern life. This is Stories of Impact, the art and science of human flourishing.
For the longest time, I've always just been interested in why people do what they do. I was also somewhat introspective about my own tendencies, my own behavior. Why do I make certain decisions and then I regret them? Or why do I show resilience in some domains, not others?
Meet Dr. Mostafa Salari Rad, a postdoctoral fellow in psychology at the New School in New York City. Born in Iran in a Shia Muslim practicing family, he always had an interest in philosophy, psychology, social science. He wondered why people behaved the way they did, why countries developed the way they did. And later, as a high school student in Japan, when he was the only person observing Ramadan, he started asking deeper questions about the self-control he had to exert to fast, as Ramadan asked of him, from sunrise to sunset. Perhaps for the first time, Dr. Rad questioned, why am I doing this? Why isn't anyone else doing this? What is this ritual for?
During this month, healthy Muslim adults are required to refrain from eating, drinking, having sex, smoking between sunrise and sunset every day for 30 consecutive days. They're also encouraged to self-reflect, pray more, attend to their community, and give to charity, and so forth.
Dr. Rad decided to study software engineering in college, but he kept being drawn to the bigger questions in life. So eventually, he took a risk, left the safer path of software engineering, and pursued a PhD in psychology, which eventually led him to focus his research on the fasting during the Islamic holy month of Ramadan, which commemorates the first revelation of the Quran to the Prophet Muhammad. The vast majority of the 1.8 billion Muslims worldwide observe the Ramadan fast.
You are self-inducing, voluntarily engaging in this restraint exercise for a good duration, and as such, it's likely to engage a range of social psychological processes such as inhibition, self-control, goal pursuit, all the way to, ritualistic behavior, religious practices, and also pro-sociality and group cohesion, and maybe even processes related to gratitude, empathy, perspective taking, and so forth.
Dr. Rad wanted to find out more about the psychological, behavioral, and social benefits of fasting, and he especially wanted to better understand the self-control Ramadan requires. One good reason to study self-control through the lens of Ramadan? It's kind of surprising that it hasn't been studied more before, Dr. Rad says, since over 90% of those practicing the fast stick with it.
I did a broad search of the kind of work that's been done on self-control training. That type of research, that body of work, is that the protocols that people have used to train self-control is often extremely varied in terms of duration, in terms of the nature of the act, and in terms of compliance. So I thought Ramadan would be a rigorous, standardized protocol without the need to monitor for compliance.
Another reason to study Ramadan? A diverse cross-section of Muslims participate, with the fast acting as a kind of socio-economic equalizer.
Ramadan has this quality that regardless of how rich you are, regardless of how affluent you are, sure, if you don't have to work, it's easier for you, but still, you still have to follow, you have to sort of reorganize the entire society to not eat and drink or whatever during a certain sort of period of time. So in that sense, regardless of where you are on the socioeconomic ladder, it's going to flatten the structure a little more. Anthropologists call it communitas, this idea that it flattens the social structure, and I think it's that kind of intervention in some sense too.
First, what is self-control, and why is Dr. Rad so interested in it? He says self-control is
your capacity to maintain goal-directed behavior in the face of all these urges and habits, and it's been shown over the course of decades that it impacts outcomes in a wide range of domains such as health, career, relationships, and finances or education and so forth. Even in substance dependence research, there's a lot of work on self-control. And it's fair to say that every individual faces self-control challenges on a daily basis. So whether it's about resisting immediate gratification or adhering to long-term goals or navigating habits, self-control is a critical factor in our lives.
Self-control is widely acknowledged as a virtue across many different cultures and religious or non-religious traditions, and it's been the subject of many scientific studies. But the research about self-control has often focused on hypothetical or experimental goals. It's relied on short-term practice routines that were manufactured for the study, or has considered exclusively the efforts of and benefits to an individual.
There's a great deal of effort dedicated to understanding and possibly improving self-control, even with our modern secular society. Like, we have all sorts of books, formulation techniques, apps, tasks, tools that are aimed at improving self-control and its related qualities, such as resilience, restraint, willpower, commitment, discipline. And there's a lot of work out there, whether it's building habits or, dopamination. There's just so much stuff that people want to know, how can I set a goal and how can I achieve it? My thinking, my reading of this whole tradition or this thread is that there's a significant amount of emphasis on self-interest and individual achievement and personal goals. So the idea is that you want to go there, you want to be productive, you want to be healthy, you want to be financially well off. So how do you do it? How do you stop from having extra candy? How do you stop yourself from skipping gym day? How do you stop yourself from spending money on things that you don't need?
Dr. Rad recognized the opportunity to study the Ramadan fast, which uniquely combines a lifelong recurring ritual, a set of strict and universal guidelines, and religious and community expectations, rather than focusing on the solely personal motives for exercising self-control.
I wanted to focus on a certain type of practice that is not directly related to the outcome. These practices often share a striking similarity, in terms of structure, in terms of form and shape, and also in terms of outcome, that is to cultivate self-control. But I take it to a next level and argue that these institutionalized practices, although they're designed to enhance self-control, these ancient traditional ones, they ultimately aim to foster prosociality and enhance social cohesion. So instead of building on, in the modern sort of secular version, which builds on self-interest and aims to enhance performance and likelihood of achieving personal goals, these traditional sort of historical cultural ones seem to be building on self-denial and selflessness to enhance collective goals and increase prosociality and achieve social cohesion. See, people don't fast to lose weight during Ramadan. People don't fast in Ramadan even to build self-discipline or self-control. And if this is going to influence their self-control capacity, then we should witness improvements in a wide range of domains. A lot of people who probably fast in Ramadan might not even have issues with self-control. They might not even think about that. It's just a ritual that they engage in. And so I wanted to see if I strip down this practice, this sort of exercise in self-control from its immediate, directly, proximately related goal, and do I still get some improvement in self-control as a general skill? I wanted to see if this has implications for the society at large. Does the whole group who sort of engages in this type of ritual on a larger scale show changes that are systematically related to Ramadan?
Dr. Rad and his team sought to investigate the impact of the Ramadan fast on the physical and mental health, social relationships and societal flourishing, and sense of fulfillment and spirituality of those who observe it.
The idea is to examine if this religious exercise can essentially improve people's abilities to exert self-control, meaning broadly the capacity to maintain goal-directed behavior in the face of impulsive urges and habits, and also whether it can contribute to people's willingness to engage in pro-social acts and show generosity and reciprocity and altruism towards their fellow human beings. Fasting essentially engages inhibitory control processes. Inhibition is one of the core parts of self-control. It's this idea of just being able to essentially rein in the habitual automated dominant response and activating an alternate response. Essentially, instead of finding ways tailored to specific sort of domains such as health, productivity, or education, I wanted to see if these type of rituals can be sort of a more generalized tool to enable individuals to pursue or to achieve their individualized goals, but at the same time also lead to better outcomes for the whole group.
Dr. Rad is finishing 3 years of research into the Ramadan fast and self-control. The first part of Dr. Rad's study examines whether people's ability to exercise self-control can get stronger over time. The second part examines whether exercising self-control in a religious community increases people's willingness to care for others. Dr. Rad and his team were careful to design their experiments so that participants don't simply self-report feelings about whether their self-control improves during Ramadan. Rather, they participate in tasks that allow the researchers to evaluate their reactions objectively. For example, in one experiment, participants are asked to react to different images on a computer screen.
I'm showing you a blue star or a yellow star on the left-hand side or the right-hand side of the screen, either this one or that one, right? And I tell you that if you see a blue star, I want you to press on the arrow key on your computer that points to the same direction as the one where the blue star is showing. Blue star shows on the left, you press the left arrow key, and vice versa. For the yellow stars, I want you to switch. I want you to give me the incongruent response.
Dr. Rad explains that this activity allows the research team to measure participants' ability to inhibit themselves.
So if the yellow star shows on the right side of the screen, I want you to press on the arrow key that points to the left. So in this task, we gave people 60 trials, the yellow, blue star in each of those trials. The trick is that we have 45 blue stars and 15 yellow stars. So essentially, we are building this habitual response that people see the blue star and constantly quickly click on the arrow key that points to the same direction. So we're facilitating that response. And then for every 3 blue stars, we suddenly show a yellow star. And they need to suddenly suppress that habituated response. They need to be like, oh, I need to switch. So I need to suppress this response and activate another response. So this is what we call inhibition. So I need to basically, okay, this is a yellow star. I need to switch my response. So that means that I need to suppress the dominant response that I've habituated to, and I need to activate the alternate response. So if people are less accurate in those yellow star trials, right? And if people are taking longer to distinguish between these two types of stars, that means that their inhibitory control processes have been interfered with.
What research findings have surprised them?
I was surprised to find a good sort of linear improvement in inhibitory control. I didn't think the effect would be as clean and sort of evident, from pre to during and after Ramadan. People are improving in their inhibitory control performance. I thought that was interesting.
And what does that tell Dr. Rad?
My current working hypothesis about this is that this self-signaling process is likely to promote a sense of personal agency and moral responsibility, and perhaps engage or activate values of care and fairness that apply to everyone versus those values that are more selective, such as in-group loyalty and respect for authority and that type of thing. And consequently, the pro-sociality that is induced by the Ramadan fast, which is more of a private ritual, is likely to apply to not only in-group, but also out-group members and non-in-group members. That means that people are essentially becoming more nice towards everyone. That's the working hypothesis that I have. And so far, the evidence seems to suggest that there is some room to believe that's the case, but that work is still ongoing.
Dr. Rad also wanted to explore whether the niceness inspired by the Ramadan fast was more likely to be offered only to those in one's own community, or whether that kindness and generosity would be offered to everyone. For this part of the study, Dr. Rad and his team use a common research tool called the dictator game, in which one participant, playing the part of a dictator, is given a sum of money and told they can keep all of it or share some of it with their counterpart in the study. What did that game reveal?
before Ramadan, the Ramadan participants and control participants are essentially giving more or less the same amount to their counterpart. But when I test them during Ramadan, the Ramadan participants are being significantly more generous. And again, look, there's no reason for them to be generous. And this is actually some kind of a puzzle in behavioral economics and psychology. Why do people even give anything in dictator game? You don't have to. Nobody's going to judge you. It's an anonymous game. They're not going to know. No, it's nothing. There's no reason for you to give any. So according to some kind of hardcore rational actor model, there's no reason for you to give away anything. You're not gaining anything. You're not even being recognized as a person who's generous. There are no reputational gains. So why would you do that? But before Ramadan, they're also giving 20%. During Ramadan, they end up giving about 40%. And after Ramadan, they give about 35% or 30%. Just asking them, how difficult do you find it? I found that to be significantly related to how important the fasting is to them. Right? To what extent is it related to their identity?
Dr. Rad understands that making the Ramadan ritual part of your identity, though, can make the fast itself more complicated.
But at the same time, that also meant that they were likely to be fasting to avoid feelings of shame and guilt, which are subsumed under this category of motives called introjected motives. So the more important this is, the easier the fast is for you. But at the same time, it's harder because you are trying to avoid shame and guilt.
Another outcome of Dr. Rad's study? He's also found that participants' beliefs about their own ability to develop self-control influences how much the fast ultimately helps them to strengthen it.
The degree to which participation in the fast leads to improvement in your inhibitory control performance depends on the type of beliefs you have about your own self-control capacity. So it's not enough to just say, I'm fasting and therefore I'm going to improve in self-control. That practice, that training has to be coupled with a belief that you have good self-control and that you value self-control and you want to have more self-control. So beliefs alone or practice alone aren't enough to improve self-control. And we find that people in the control group are not practicing fasting, right? But even those that believe they have good self-control don't seem to improve over time. So this is essentially saying that if you want to train people by having them follow this restraint ritual, you need to couple that with a type of belief that sort of tells them that you have good self-control and you can improve on it.
Ultimately, Dr. Rad hopes to create interventions informed by his Ramadan research to help any individual who desires better self-control to develop it. This finding that people need to believe that they have the ability to improve is key.
Let's say, for example, I have these ways of training people to quit smoking, for example, or to reduce their consumption of sweets, right? And that's what they want. And if I tell them about all these tools, all these solutions, techniques, and whatever, these training sort of exercises, interventions, whatever, if I just focus on that, I'm less likely to get the improvements that I desire relative to if I couple that training exercise, that intervention with this idea that you have self-control and that self-control is a good thing, you value self-control and you want to improve on it. Essentially, training plus motivation, plus having this sort of positive self-evaluation of one's self-control capacity, these two together can lead to actual change.
I look forward to revisiting Dr. Rad's research in the future to hear more about the interventions he's developing to help observant and non-observant people alike exercise more self-control. In the meantime, it's exciting new knowledge that a spiritual practice like the 1,400-year-old Ramadan fast embodies ancient wisdom that has the power to increase human flourishing through helping people achieve goals, strengthening systems of care, deepening social connections, and even a sense of equality. What a beautiful and hopeful discovery on this episode of Stories of Impact. This is just the first in a series of scientific explorations of the positive impact of religious rituals in modern-day life. In the second in this series, we continue the conversation about the science of fasting with two Jewish scholars. We hope you'll come back in 2 weeks for another uplifting exploration about the future of human flourishing. If you like the Stories of Impact podcast, please follow us. And if you have a minute, it would really actually be awesome if you could give us a 5-star rating and a review. And we'd be thrilled to hear from you. You can find us at our new website at storiesofimpact.org. This has been the Stories of Impact podcast with interviews by Richard Sergey and Tavia Gilbert. Written and produced by Tavia Gilbert for Talkbox Productions. Senior producer Katie Flood. Assistant producer Oscar Falk. Production support by Mandy Morish. Music by Alexander Filipiak. Mix and master by Kayla Elrod. Executive producer Michelle Cobb. The Stories of Impact podcast is generously supported by Templeton World Charity Foundation.